Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce. This is Ukraine War News Update, first part thereof for the 20th of May 2024. Let's get straight to where we normally start. Ukrainian general staff figures for the Russian losses for the day before, all the usual caveats apply, of course. You can find them in the description to the video found below. Right, another heavy day of Russian losses. Just really significant losses. 1,400 personnel lost. That is a tick up. I have seen I guess apropos to the stats in general, I have seen an awful lot of footage coming out. I've just seen a load from the 47th Assault Brigade taking out BTR after BTR of personnel. I've got a couple of videos to reference concerning the ability of drones, FPV drones, to completely detonate tanks and cause vehicles to violently disassemble. I'm sure that FPVs, they've just increased the penetrability and the explosive capacity of those IEDs on board. Just, yeah, really significant hits, thwarting of attacks. It's interesting that so many of these attacks are 1, 2, or 3 IFVs or APCs. Actually APCs really, max. There aren't these significant numbers of attack vehicles doing their thing. So 1,400 personnel lost is significant. 14 tanks is a fairly high number, you know, considering tanks are, I think, slightly hard to come by these days. There must be, and we are seeing more, much greater use of infantry fighting vehicles, APCs, and actually things like golf carts, motorbikes, etc, etc. 35 armored personnel vehicles is a very high number there, double the average, daily average. 50 artillery systems is huge. That's 3 times the daily average and some. So that is a really high set of numbers right across those categories. 2 multiple launch rocket systems, 4 anti-aircraft warfare systems, that's double the average. 1 warship or boat, we're going to talk about that in a little while. 60 vehicles and fuel tanks is a very high number there, and 2 pieces of special equipment. 81 drones is a really high number for the Ukrainians who shot down the Russians. I don't know how they're calculating that and what drones they're referring to, and whether there's a large scale destruction of Russian drones like Lancet drones and these larger drones that are used on the front lines, because the Russians, as far as I understand, did not send 81 drones over last night or the night before. So just trying to work out how that number is calculated, as in the Shahed type drones, because previously that's been mainly Shahed, operational tactical level. That's not going to, obviously not going to be FPV drones, but where is the cutoff line for that? So I think that may include things like Zala, Orlands, and so on and so forth, not just the large attack drones. But yeah, right. So let's talk ships. According to unconfirmed sources, says actually is now being confirmed more officially. On the night of the 19th, May the 19th, 2024, so that's not last night, it's the night before, Russian project 22800, 22800 Cyclone small missile ship was sunk in the port of Sevastopol as a result of a missile strike. Russian Navy received the ship in July 2023. It was built in Kerch, a really recently built ship. Strike was allegedly carried out by 2 ATACMS ballistic missiles. There are deaths and injuries among the servicemen due to the sinking. Now, this claimed there were 6 servicemen who were killed and 11 injured when that was sunk. So Russian channels reported this. It's a Karakurt class ship being struck by 2 ATACMS. Ukrainian channels reported this morning, so yesterday morning, that the minesweeper Kovrovets was sunk. But I believe that those ships got mixed up. The Karakurt class ship is a more valuable target. So yesterday I was wondering why they would target, of all the ships in Sevastopol, a minesweeper. So I was thinking that's interesting, because there are more useful ships such as this one to take out. So the one theory is that they've got the ships mixed up, and actually the minesweeper wasn't sunk and this was the one that was sunk, right? So As he says here, I believe the two ships got mixed up. The Karakurt ship was more valuable. Destruction of the Cyclone is a painful loss for the Russian Black Sea Fleet, since it is one of the ships capable of firing caliber cruise missiles. And then Noel Report says, however, and this is a much more recent one, this is just from this morning, in addition to the corvette's Minesweeper, which was reportedly destroyed yesterday, the destruction of another ship, the Cyclone, is likely, according to Navy spokesman Dmytro Pletenchuk. Quote, actually, this information is still being verified because in order to be 100% sure, it is still necessary to obtain the appropriate results of objective control. In other words, satellite imagery, I would have thought. As soon as we have these results, we'll definitely inform the public about it. So there are various contrasting theories, but it could be that two ships have actually been sunk. One, a Minesweeper. I'd still question why go for the Minesweeper, and the Cyclone. And what's important about the Cyclone is that it means that if the Cyclone has been sunk, there will be not a single cruise missile carrying ship in Sevastopol. There will only be in Novorossiysk. That's the last cruise missile carrier there. So that's really significant. The Ukrainians done an absolutely incredible job of removing the threat of cruise missiles from Sevastopol. As these kinds of successes you think would be more widely reported in mainstream media. Of course, you need confirmation of this, but this is really significant. Ukrainians are doing but those two missile and drone attacks that we saw, 2 out of the last 3 nights, have been incredible, and you wonder whether they've been reported enough by mainstream media, who love to doom about Ukraine's position, but rarely talk about its incredible successes. As Phillips O'Brien says here, if ATACMS are taking out Russian warships in Sevastopol, it's hard to see the base having much utility left for the Russians. Remember those people saying ATACMS would not make much of a difference? They were wrong. Absolutely. And in fact, there are some claiming, so probably David Axe in Forbes, claiming that if Ukraine hit corvettes with ATACMS, it could mean that Ukraine has got the 170-mile M48 or 190-mile M57 ATACMS with a 470-pound warhead, in addition to getting the M39 and M39A1 ATACMS with submunitions. So unitary warhead with much bigger explosive capability is certainly what would have taken out that ship if it was an ATACMS. Significant losses in Sevastopol, possibly. Could be that 2 ships were sunk, but wait for official confirmation there. And then what do we have here? I obviously can't show you too many of these. That was it. So it's always trying to tell you something by referencing these videos. You can check out the full videos. They are linked below. The Russians almost do not use armoured vehicles in the Kharkiv direction. So the main part of logistics takes place on loaves and golf carts. So Bukankas, these Scooby-Doo vans, or the Desert Cross 1000-3, the golf cart that the Russians are using that they got from China via New Zealand, weirdly. All ammo are driven on them, protected by electronic warfare, but not protected by armour. These loaves are on fire from our drones, which we convert to non-standard frequencies and accurately hit targets. Over the past few days, this is the 5th burned loaf of bread that was transporting ammo and detonated. So why are they using these? Why use a vehicle that doesn't have the ammo? Is it because it's slightly faster? But then, if they're using electronic warfare on these, you can use electronic warfare on an APC or an IFV. So, why not use those? And is it because they are just short on the ground for those kinds of vehicles? Is this a sign of desperation, or is this using those vehicles because they're the best vehicles to use in those contexts? I don't know. Now, here we have a Russian drone base being detected in Ocheretny area, which is in the northern Avdiivka salient. I can't show you this, but my goodness, this building blows up. I'm trying to work out what goes on here, because it goes from first person view footage and then cuts to the entire building just absolutely going down. It says here FPV that caused a secondary detonation, but I can't see how that happened. Anyway, you might want to check that out and see what goes on. But I'm seeing a lot of these. So either the drones themselves are just have huge explosive capacities, and I've seen drones take out buildings recently, but also they can trigger secondary explosions that fundamentally disassemble those buildings equally. So yeah, high value target there, considering it's possibly a drone base, a whole drone crew, and all the kit they'll have inside that building. So that's a good, really high value target, I would have thought. Here we have a T-80 tank that is just happily driving along, and a tiny little drone, by the looks of it, flies past this way, circles back round and hits it. And I think this is another case of definitely hitting in a key weak spot of these tanks, which is just around the turret. I presume the T-80 has that auto loader going around the rim of the turret there, where it fixes to the main chassis, the main body, and my goodness, that goes up big time. And it's incredible what a little drone can do to a big tank. That is a fundamentally well, it's not a tank anymore. It really does go up. And then just to go, so that's a few. Having said that, these kind of videos, I'm sure you can see Ukrainian vehicles. This is not like, oh, look at the Ukrainians, well done them, how incredible they are doing in blowing up loads of Russian stuff. There is a kind of element of that, but it's not to say the Russians aren't doing this to the Ukrainians. But of course, what we need to do then is look at the data, and what Tochny have shown is that the Ukrainians are doing this more to the Russians. They are striking far, far more vehicles than the Russians are with their drones. That's going to partly be, or perhaps even largely, it will be because the Ukrainians aren't using vehicles to the same degree that the Russians are, because they are in a defensive posture. And so in that defensive posture, when you are in trenches, in dugouts, in buildings, waiting for the Russians to attack, you aren't throwing your mechanized equipment at the Russians. So that's partly why we see more Russian vehicles get taken out by drones. But it could also be that Ukrainians just have more drones than the Russians, even though the Russians claim to be manufacturing 6 times more than the Ukrainians. Okay, Russia on fire here, another one of these, not a big one, but it is a local government building on fire, and you're wondering if there's just widespread dissatisfaction. Does this have anything to do with the war, or is this just another careless smoker in the Russian capital? Right, we're going on to distance munitions. 29 out of 29 drones, Shahed drones, shot down last night. That is yet another night of 100% interception rates for these types of drones. This is absolutely incredible. And if this is true, so yeah, it could be that there's disinformation here. But the Ukrainians have previously been very honest, like I've said yesterday. They've previously been very honest with their interception rates on drones. So I don't particularly doubt this. I just think they are, as time goes on, you would expect this to be the case. As the allies, the 50 allies that are giving them radar and anti-drone capabilities and are providing them with more Gepards as the weeks go by. For example, among the many other Skynets, we know that the Germans have provided the awesome looking Skynet systems as well. They're getting more and more systems and radar capability to be able to take these out. You would expect the drone interception rates to be improving. And that's exactly what we're seeing. Missiles are slightly different because there are some missiles that the Russians use that the Ukrainians, best will in the world, are not going to be able to shoot down, or at least not all the time. So you can shoot them down if they come near Kyiv or come near a Patriot system. But with the shortage of Patriot systems that the Ukrainians have, there are missiles that will get through. S-300s, surface-to-air missiles, are going to get through. Iskander-Ms at the moment are going to get through if they're shot in certain places. And the Russians will know where they can shoot those. So the interception rates for missiles are more problematic, but for these kind of drones, I think we've reached a period where they have become really not very effective for the Russians at all. And then the Russians are going to have to start thinking whether it's still worth building and sending them in the quantities they are, if they are going to have 100% interception rate or near enough. Now, there will be times when they will want to send these with the huge waves of missiles that may have a better effect because they're being used sacrificially. But then if they are getting taken down predominantly with the less technologically advanced kind of machine guns or anti-aircraft guns, as opposed to being intercepted by NASAMS, Patriots, SAMP-T, whatever, then it's still not particularly sacrificial. It's only when they're taken out by the higher value air defense missiles that they become useful. So I'm interested to see where Russia are at with these kind of drones. But it's certainly this last week, it could just be an anomalous week. It could just be a lucky week for the Ukrainians, and they've just had 100% on virtually every day they've been used. And next week we could be down to 75%, 60%, whatever. We shall see. But I have certainly, I mean, you can't help but have a better feeling about these drones because of the interception rates that we've seen, if they are true. In occupied Donetsk, air defense fire was filmed by Russia's state propaganda agency. There was an explosion heard in a Proletarsky district in the southeast of the city. So Donetsk was hit last night. Don't know what was hit. Then this was not from last night, but from yesterday morning, it seems, or at least the night before. So this is Krasnodar in Russia. All drones were successfully intercepted, say the Russians, and a massive fire somewhere there. I don't know if that was an oil depot. It doesn't look particularly black smoke, or whether that was airbase, or whether it's just something completely different. But anyway. And then I think this might have been 2 nights ago again. On the night of May the 19th, could be last night 19th to 20th, or could be the 18th to the 19th. But nonetheless, because they did hit this air base 2 nights ago. So on the night of the May the 19th, an attack on the armed forces by the armed forces of Ukraine has damaged the Su-27 aircraft at the Kushnevskaya military airfield in Krasnodar Krai. According to the Russian outlet Astra, at least 3 drones struck the airfield, causing a fire that damaged a fighter jet and infrastructure. Local residents reported the drone attack, but emergency services only mentioned a localized fire. I wonder whether that's there. I mean, that's in Krasnodar. I don't know whether that's the airbase that is significantly on fire. So that's good news that a Su-27 was possibly taken out of service there. Now, today, there's been a strike on Luhansk. Russian sources reported that the target was Yubileyny settlement, which is packed with industrial zones used by Russian forces as military bases. There's a Russian, translated Russian post I'd seen saying, oh, it might be in Ukrainian, I don't know. Anyway, saying that the Russians had just got some men and, was it missiles? Certainly ammunition of some sort to a base. And then that base was visited by these, what appears to be Scalp, e.g. the French equivalent of the Storm Shadow missiles used here. And there's been one of these missiles has supposedly, got the very convenient made in France, MBDA, blah, 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 blah. So that is an example of the Scalp missile fragment, possibly from one that was shot down. So there is an explosion there. It looks like a successful hit. They usually come in pairs. And there's now footage coming out of a Scalp getting taken out. It looks like one of the missiles was intercepted by Russian air defense and detonated in the air a short time after this. So who knows what the fragment was from. But yeah, at least one of those missiles was intercepted, it appears. Right, so going on to, what I had something for there, I can't remember what it was, damn it. Right, we're going to talk a little bit about Kharkiv and the offensive up there in these other bits and pieces. So, commander of the Achilles unit within the 92nd Brigade said that Ukraine has managed to retake previously lost positions. It's not reported where these locations are exactly. So that's interesting that the Ukrainians are claiming to have taken some positions back from the Russians there. Footage from the Russian Volunteer Corps which is engaged in fighting near Vovchansko. So that's one of the units being used to defend. These were the Russian Volunteer Corps, one of the groups that were fighting across the border, going and doing these incursions north of Kharkiv and Sumy, but actually they could be being used by the Ukrainians to do some of their defensive work there, rather than take frontline troops away from other areas. And this is what I wanted to say about Kharkiv. This is the opening gambit I wanted to use. So Kharkiv region, according to no reports, quite remarkable. The Russians' advance in the region appears to have been bogged down over the past 2 days. The Ukrainian General Staff also notes that not a single attack from the Russians has been detected. Perhaps the losses are too great for Russia. Quite incredible, and feeds into what I was saying last night in my frontline update, which is, I wasn't expecting it here, but in general, the Russians sort of culminating. They're exhausting themselves. They don't have the strength in depth. I mean, goodness me, they have quite a few troops up there, but not massive amounts for, say, an assault on Kharkiv. But they are supposedly... They supposedly have 30,000 around this area at their disposal. I mean, if they have not attacked 0 times in one day. I mean, there was a claim that the General Staff, where is it? Oh, no, it's not there. The General Staff had... here it is. The report from the General Staff in which it claimed that 0 attacks in the Kharkiv direction were noted. 0 attacks. The Russians didn't attack once yesterday in this big, scary attack that the mainstream media was so loudly reporting on. I wonder if they're going to report today that there were 0 attacks in that direction over the last 24 hours. We saw no change to the westernmost salient yesterday, and only limited changes to the easternmost salient. Goodness me, get your compass right. Salient yesterday, and that was based on the previous 24 hours. Well, now there might be even less of a change to the front line in that area. Quite incredible. I could be being too positive though, but it does seem that it has ground down to a much slower rate there. Now, Zelensky himself has said that the West doesn't want Ukraine to win. His words are careful, but the meaning is clear, says Timothy Milovanov. So he's an economist who used to be a minister for the economy for the government. Zelensky talks about the US fear of Russia losing and thus preventing Ukraine from winning, but the implication is simple: the war will go on. This is fascinating because I've talked a number of times about how some of the anti-escalation thinkers around the world, and particularly in the Biden administration, are worrying, or one of the theories, I don't know if it's definitely how someone like Jake Sullivan thinks. But one of the theories is that the breakup of the Russian Federation is too much of a challenge to global security. So they kind of want Russia to be exhausted and to maybe leave the war with their tail between their legs, but not be fundamentally defeated, so that the entire country breaks up. And this is what Zelensky appears to be talking about. Indeed, if Ukraine gets just enough support not to lose, Russia will be tempted to keep trying until Putin dies. Some might argue if it is not true, and the US is doing all it can to help Ukraine, but it's not easy. There are elections, a dysfunctional Congress, etc. But true, but not. That's not the reason for why the aid to Ukraine is delayed, limited, and restricted in use. Remember HIMARS, too escalatory to give Ukraine. ATACMS, NASAMS, tanks, artillery, drones, F-16s, Patriots. It's always the same story. Eventually, Ukraine gets it, but only after a long delay and tons of excuses why this isn't possible or may provoke Russia. So this is a clear policy, not an unfortunate coincidence of circumstances. The US wants to support Ukraine, but not enough for it to win. But then what's the US's strategy about how to end the war? My sense is that there is some vague idea that eventually Putin would be willing to negotiate and then Ukraine can be divided. Of course, no one will say this publicly, but behind every closed door, there are signals to be realistic. In fact, Putin uses similar language when he talks about the need to respect realities on the ground. I'm not saying that Russia and the US are colluding to split Ukraine. Far from it, but it's true that both Russia and the US expect Ukraine to give up some territory. Russia says this directly. The US doesn't, but it surely acts that way by restricting Ukraine's capabilities. While I don't agree with that outcome, let's consider it seriously for a second. Imagine the US wants to freeze a conflict at some contact line. Russia wants to freeze it in such a way so it can leverage it in the future, politically or militarily. It can attack again in 5 years' time, or it can hope to impose political conditions on Ukraine that will eventually turn it into Belarus. It might not succeed, but it will definitely try. This is the importance of signing all the security agreements that Ukraine are doing, so that in the event of a further attack, if there is peace negotiations, actually there should be enough deterrence. It's a bit like an Article 5, but bilaterally with other countries. And then there are some thoughts that if they do a peace negotiation, what it could entail is Ukraine joining NATO, so that Russia can't do any further bites of the apple. But anyway, Milovanov says it might not succeed, but it will definitely try. What does the US want? A sustainable peace so that the problem goes away. It doesn't care about territory or people in Ukraine, but wants the fighting to stop on whatever terms. What should happen for the fighting to stop? The contact line should stop moving, because as long as it moves, both parties are engaged and will try harder. But this requires giving Ukraine sufficient support, so no matter how hard Russia tries, Ukraine can hold. The US believes it can manage this support on day-to-day or month-to-month basis. It worries that if Ukraine is given too much support, it will win the war. The fear there is if Russia loses, it can get destabilized, and that would be very scary. Clear weapons, aggressive military. The US certainly has a point, although I reasonably disagree with it. In my view, the only way to achieve stability in the region is for Russia to lose. It has to learn that it doesn't always win. It doesn't always get away with whatever it does, because otherwise it will continue to disrupt the region. Anyway, even if one were to agree with the US position, the way they are going about it is wrong. There is no way they can do measured weapons delivery to hold the line. Russia will outplay them. This is exactly what is happening in Kharkiv now. My point is that the US should become real and decide whether it wants Ukraine to win or not. If it does, it should give proper support. If it doesn't, there should be a realistic alternative to the war, which will last as long as it takes for Putin to die. If the US withdraws support, Ukraine might fall. Despite their rhetoric to support Ukraine as long as it takes, US politicians might not care that much, but they are wrong, and they should. If Ukraine falls, Russia will be emboldened. There will be a major refugee crisis from Ukraine. We will be seeing tens of millions of people, and Russia-friendly state then will border Poland. Russia will quickly turn Ukraine into a Belarus or worse. The world will watch with horror as war crimes take place in occupied territories, and the politicians in the West who allowed this disaster to happen will carry political responsibility. Now, I'm not sure I agree with all of that analysis there, to be quite honest, and I am split on what the US is doing, and whether this drip feeding is purposeful or whether it's part of both an administration that has elements of anti-escalation in it, serious elements, and an administration that's also worrying about election and is having to deal with a MAGA republicanism that has stalled aid for 7 months. You know, they are supposedly just putting together a $2 billion deal, which is really significant. So I don't know. I can see arguments both ways here. And I did propose this argument really early on in the war, that because back in April 2022, Lloyd Austin said that he wanted Russia to be degraded in such a way that it wouldn't be able to do this ever again. So in other words, this long-term degradation of the Russian armed forces, which I think has happened actually. I think that Russia wouldn't be able to do much again with ground forces for a generation. I don't know. Let me know what you think. So Russia, says Ewan McDonald, has assembled a third of its combat-ready Tu-95MS and Tu-22M3 bombers at its Olenya base in northern Russia, according to Defense Express. Satellite images from May the 15th show 12 Tu-95MS and 13 Tu-22M3, 1 Tu-160 and 2 AN-12 transport aircraft, possibly delivering missiles. What is going on there? Is this a case of moving their larger bombing fleet further back to protect them more? Does this then make their subsequent missions far more inefficient and problematic and logistically challenging? I don't know, but interesting that there's been a bit of a fleet movement there. Ukraine is to introduce power outages across the country late on May the 20th. So it's late today. Ukraine will introduce hourly energy shutdowns for industrial and household consumers in all oblasts from 6 p.m. tonight, local time, until midnight. So that is the energy is a huge challenge in Ukraine. Putin's 20-year looting binge has left Russia in an accelerated state of constant collapse, says Jay and Kyiv. So this is yet another region under floodwater. This is Yakutia, which is way over to the east, and that is suffering from flooding that seems to have affected so much of Russia over the last month or so. And then finally, pressures from the war in Ukraine are reportedly contributing to a massive staff shortage in Russia's internal security services. So the internal security forces are huge in Russia, and they are bigger than the armed forces, or traditionally have been. So when we say, let's hope that there's a revolution in Russia or some kind of political upheaval driven by popular dissent, actually it's very difficult for the population to rise up because there are such a huge number of internal security service members who will just round you up and lock you up. And this stops political dissent, which is why people prefer to leave the country rather than stand up against anything inside the country. But the Interior Ministry is said to be short of 152,000 staff. As a result, it's reportedly paralysed and unable to do its job in fighting crime. One of the Telegram channels that Chris Owicki here refers to reports that the Interior Ministry head Vladimir Koltsev recently told Russia's Federation Council, the Russian legislature's upper house, that his ministry was short of 152,000 personnel. The figure had increased by 150% in the last 6 months. This follows reports last year that tens of thousands of vacancies in the Ministry of Interior, MVD, with many policemen and other security personnel quitting to find better prospects elsewhere. Situation appears to have got worse since then. Of course, when you've got labour shortage and you have people vying for, particularly men, so many men are being sent off to war, fewer men to do the jobs that exist, and so therefore the wages go up as supply and demand affects the labour market. And that means that if you are in the internal security services and you think, I can go and work in the manufacturing industry for the defence contractor here and get paid more money, I'm going to do that, and I don't have to fight ne'er-do-wells on the streets. According to an Interior Ministry source, this is due to a combination of cumbersome recruitment processes, competition from the military due to better salaries being offered to go and fight in Ukraine, and a steady exodus of demoralised employees. New employees must pass a military medical examination and obtain various pieces of paperwork or for employment, presumably for vetting purposes, which takes 6 months. Once they join, they must undergo 6 months of training. It therefore takes a year for them to be operational. Many employees have quit to go to much better paid jobs fighting for the Russian army in Ukraine. Even better paid employees in senior roles such as heads of departments and divisions are said to be at a low starting point compared to the military. So it's not just the military, I would argue, but it's if the military draws from other sectors, then those other sectors will be short, and it's this knock-on effect. The reason for this is the fact that MVD's work is completely paralysed. Employees are puzzled by excessive bureaucracy and mismanagement within the MVD are also cited as factors. According to the source, the flow of resignations increased after it became clear that Koltsev would be staying in his position. The reason for this is the fact that the MVD's work is completely paralysed. Employees are puzzled by tasks unfamiliar to them, as well as instead of real fight against crime, there's paperwork, assignments, checks and reports. The Interior Ministry's problems illustrate how the pressure of the war in Ukraine are hollowing out other elements of the Russian state. As previously reported, the result has been a rise in crime, with many serious offences, including rape and murder, going unsolved. It's really interesting how the war is not just a problem in and of itself. There's so many knock-on effects, labour shortage as mentioned, and then a labour shortage within the internal security services, the police, where they are unable to solve crimes as crime rate then goes up. I talked to you previously about one of the biggest deterrents isn't the harshness of punishment. That has only a nominal effect on whether someone commits a crime or not. One of the biggest effects is the probability of getting caught, sadly enough. And so if the probability of getting caught goes down because there's 152,000 police, the shortage of police and internal security services, then crime will go up. Yeah, That's nature. That's human nature, unfortunately. And so this then hopefully will cause a lack of morale within Russia. They're just getting hit all over the shop with, Russia on fire, all these places burning, floods, military not getting paid, families not getting compensation, price wage inflation spiral, drawing down from their reserves. The Russian economy is really fragile. Hydrocarbons in trouble. They're having to sell everything to China. Europe's not taking stuff, etc., etc. All of these issues happening at the same time. The question is, when does the dam break? Will the dam break? Is it close? I don't know. But anyway, there are lots of signs that things aren't going particularly well inside Russia. Anyway, thanks for watching. Please like, subscribe and share. Take care, and I'll speak to you soon.